Okay, looks like we're live. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the BYTES Summit. This is the introduction to Microsoft 365 E5 security. Now, we're probably just going to wait about 20 to 30 seconds just for the remainder of people to, of course, join us today. Anyone that's just joining in, hopefully you've got a coffee, you're all caffeined up for this morning, because we're going to be going through a good bit of content, but there's also some really good talk tracks to go through this afternoon. So from the looks of it, seems like a tad more people have actually now joined in, which is always good to see. So before we kick off, of course, always good to do a little bit of housekeeping. As you come into this session, you are muted. You can't take yourself off of mute. It is just going to be myself and Dave speaking for the day. But if you do have any questions, please submit these within the chat box. We've got various members of the team manning these chat boxes, as Dave and I are very incapable of multitasking. So answering chat messages as we go isn't probably going to be the best experience there. If you do come up with a question after this session, there are booths available today. You can ask, all sorts of questions to the team, and you can get in touch with specialists. So really encourage you to use those booths as much as possible. And finally, all of these talk tracks will be recorded and they will be made available following these sessions. So in terms of today, you're probably wondering who is speaking. I'm, of course, Gennaro, but before I introduce myself, I'm going to pass over to Dave first, as he is the first one on screen.
Thanks, Gennaro. So good morning, everybody. My name's David Rawle. I'm the Group CTO here at BYTES Software Services. I've been working in the IT security industry and for BYTES in one guise or another for over 20 years now. Became part of the BYTES group in 2011 when BYTES purchased the business that I worked for at that time, which is a business called Security Partnerships. And at that point, we became BYTES Security Partnerships. We actually integrated BYTES Security Partnerships into BYTES Software Services on the 1st of March 2020. We thought that was really good timing. It was the start of our financial year. 19 days later, we're all in lockdown, and I'm trying to find a whole new group of people to work with and understand the new business that I work with. But we've muddled through and we're pretty much there. So I've got a very strong background, first as a consultant, then as a manager, and then as the joint MD and technical director of BYTES Security Partnerships before becoming CTO of Software Services. Gennaro?
Perfect. Thanks for that, Dave. And good morning, everyone. So Gennaro Miaccio, I'm the head of technology solutions development at BYTES. I suppose that is the fancy way of saying that I wear many hats, and my hat collection seems to be ever growing. But my background has primarily been in cybersecurity pre-sales, so understanding customer requirements and positioning security services and solutions is one of my primary functions. But I suppose the other side of the role is to, assist and support various teams within BYTES in terms of building out solutions that we take to our customer base. Now, these solutions can be anything from value adds, pre-sales activity, managed services, professional services, anything that, anything that we think that we can build out to help solve some kind of issue or gap with our customers, and building out a solution to address those gaps is pretty much where I come in. But again, pulled pillar to post all the time, and I suppose that's me in a nutshell. So in terms of today, and in terms of an agenda for today, we've already ticked box one, which is great. Dave and I have introduced ourselves, but by way of an agenda, so we're going to do a quick overview of the BYTES security division. As Dave touched on, we have gone through that merger with Security Partnerships and BYTES. So get an understanding of our security capabilities is always a good place to start. And then we'll start looking into some of the M365 E5 parts, mainly how these are utilized by businesses, but also what do those core security components look like of M365 E5? That will then tie into, well, how do we tie all these components together? For those of you that are, of course, familiar with M365 E5, you know that there's a lot of components out there, or even, just Microsoft in general. There's a lot out there. How does this start tying back in with each other? So in terms of the dedicated security division, Dave, would you like to take this away?
Yep, can do. Thank you. So The dedicated security division within BYTES, as I said, is an amalgamation really of the old BYTES Security Partnerships business that, as I said, was integrated in to software services on the 1st of March 2020, and the security practice that already existed within software services at that time. And really, it has been a 2 + 2 = 4 type situation for us, because what we had in the BSP business was very strong pre-sales, very strong technical services, very strong technical support, managed security and all that kind of stuff. But we were a relatively small business. We were around 60, 65 people at the time of integration. And what we weren't able to support was the broad spectrum of procurement and licensing conversations that the software services guys were so good at. So by bringing these two elements together, what we've been able to build and what we've been able to create is a security practice that is turning over well north now of 100 million a year. As my light turns off, it's an event. This happens. I'm just going to roll with it. And with that volume of business, it's supported by these capabilities and the way that this stuff works. So we have, as I already said, a managed security division that's able to provide managed SOC, managed SIM, and all of those kind of solutions. We have our own implementation and professional services elements, which have been running for 17, 18 years now and is a very strong part of our business. We have our procurement services. So we are able to procure and license pretty much anything for you. And as part of that, we have our asset management services where we can actually track and make sure that you're in compliance. We have our cyber consulting business, which Janara is going to talk about in a little bit more detail in a second. But underpinning all of that is our support desk. The real kind of unique element of BSP was our direct third line engineer support service. When you call us with a support query, you have the availability of getting straight through to a third line engineer and an actual consultant who can immediately delve in and start working the problems with you. You know, you ring in and they are straight away, right, let's do a remote session to fix this. And they have the skills and the capability of doing it. There isn't any, we'll log a ticket and get back to you. There is none of that kind of stuff. They're literally there straight away. And having that underpinning all of these various elements. So if we're doing an implementation and you need help with it on the back of it, if you've got a question around your managed security, if you've got a problem and you need to invoke cyber consulting and our incident response and forensics team and things like that, having that support desk there as the underpin of it has just been incredibly valuable. And it's really part of the proposition we take to our customers. The thing that a lot of people don't realize we do is the cyber consulting business though. So Janara, do you just want to cover that for everybody?
Yeah, sure. No, thank you so much, Dave. That tees me up very nicely for the cyber consulting piece. So our cyber consulting division has grown tremendously, and the way that I tend to explain this to a lot of our customers is we break it into 3 different pillars. The first one being security strategy. Security strategy is of course very important because without that direction and that lead in terms of okay, what security do we prioritize first? How do we do security correctly? And how do we govern that security? Of course, would make security relatively ineffective. So because of this, we've focused on services with things like our virtual CISO service. So we understand that a lot of organizations don't currently employ a CISO, or maybe the current CISO, as most board members are extremely busy, might need some further assistance, support, and help going through all the processes and procedures and the actual security strategy itself. Second to that, of course, is the audit advisory piece. And this is one that's actually, gaining a lot of traction and picking up a lot of ground as, more and more customers that we speak to are looking to become Cyber Essentials certified, but also with things like ISO 27001 being a key agenda for most, and, certain industries having to adhere to PCI DSS on the payment card side, really puts us in a good position to help support with those audit and advisory conversations. And of course, I suppose bread and butter around what cyber consulting does is going to be around the business assurance side, right? And this is with services like pen testing and incident management and response. So pen testing is, of course, you know, one of the key measures that we can use in security in terms of getting assurance that our security solutions are functioning as intended, but also giving us an understanding of where those weak points are. And of course, our incident management is something that's really picked up. And whilst it is a good thing, it's almost also a bad thing. The incident management side is, you know, the digital forensics and incident management when our customers have experienced a breach. So while this capability of ours has increased, it's almost, well, you know, it's almost still a bad thing, because that means more and more people are suffering these breaches and compromises. But hopefully that gives a flavor over the key 3 areas of cyber consulting and our capabilities within that space. So enough about BYTES for now. Hopefully that gives enough to for everyone to understand that you know, where BYTES is in the security space, and that we actually know what we're talking about. So let's go to the main body of content, which is you know, the M365 E5 security pieces. So I suppose to start off this conversation, when we talk around Microsoft 365, we know that this is all umbrellaed by 3 key components, right? It's Office 365, which we've heard of for the past couple of years. Windows Enterprise, or just simply you know, Windows, which we all know and love, we all know and use, and of course the enterprise mobility and security side. Now, for the purposes of today, a lot of this is going to focus around the security piece, mainly around the EM&S piece, but also security does touch all 3 of these areas, and I'll explain why on the next slide when it goes to the next one. So I'm guessing a number of you have probably seen this diagram from Aaron Dinnage's GitHub. It's a really good diagram to actually break down what components there are within the Microsoft stack. Now, these ones that you're seeing on screen, we're not going to go through every single one of these today. We only have a finite amount of time. And these ones are specifically focused on the E5 side. Now, we've actually used these diagrams quite a bit, and we've actually seen over the last 2.5 years, more and more components being added, which is definitely, you know, a very good sign on Microsoft's side, because they are investing in this area. They are you know, throwing a lot of money, time, and attention into these spaces and developing, you know, more and more components that we can use on the security, productivity, and compliance side. Now, of course, as mentioned, there's a lot of components on here. We're not going to be going through all of them today. We're going to be touching on the core security ones. And I suppose to put that in a little bit of perspective, it's going to be these bottom 3 or 4 areas. And I suppose to structure this conversation a little bit more, instead of going through the components as we see them in the licensing world, we're going to actually start aligning these to the kill chain. So the main components of M365 E5 is going to be our Defender for Office, Defender for Identity, Defender for Endpoint, but also Microsoft Cloud App Security. Those 4 key components effectively make up the M365 E5 security bundle, and all of these align to the kill chain in some shape or form. Now, when we actually look across the kill chain with these components, we can see that Microsoft does close these gaps within security. They have got a very nice story to tell around here, but also the way that these components can interact with each other also start closing those gaps more and more. We then have other technologies that we can start adding into the mix, such as Azure Sentinel, you know, being a SIEM tool, and being able to plug in all of that information from various different sources to give us even more intelligence of our environment. Probably worthwhile mentioning in terms of the Sentinel side, we're not going to touch on Sentinel today. However, later on in the day, we do have a Sentinel session, so please do stay tuned for that. And in terms of what you saw on the previous slide, we are focusing on security. However, all of those other components, the ones that you probably saw around compliance, we've also got a session regarding that this afternoon too. So again, please do stay tuned if those are areas of interest. But in terms of today, we're going to be looking through these core M365 E5 services. And the first place that we always start off with is emails. Now, let's face it, emails are everywhere. Everyone uses them, and because of that, they do pose, one of the biggest risks within security for all businesses. And this is where, typically a lot of attackers will gain their foothold, right? They will start sending out, various phishing links or attachments. A user will then click on these, and all of a sudden, this is exactly where the security compromise starts. So how does Defender for Office 365 look to address this? Well, first and foremost, this service is aimed at actually protecting users, not just at the mail level anymore, but also the Teams, OneDrive, and an actual Office application level. It's all around, okay, well, what is contained within those files? Do we have to sandbox and check those files? But also, where do these links point us to? Do we need to scan where these links are going to and actually understand, is that site malicious? So one of the misconceptions that we tend to have, and I know that I started off on the email side, but Defender for Office 365, it is not just focused on emails. It's focused on a lot of different services within Office 365. Now, because it's connected into a lot of those different services, it gives us tremendous visibility of the threats across our organization and across our Office 365 estate. And if that wasn't enough, what we can also gain from Defender from Office 365 is we can actually start launching real-world phishing and training simulations. So we can actually take templates of phishing emails and throw this out to our user base and actually see, well, who are the risky users? Who are the users that require more user awareness training? All of this is all designed to reduce the risk around emails, as well as reduce the risk around SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, and all of those productivity apps that users are currently using.
And I think the clear thing to add to this, to add to what Gennaro was just saying, is that email is still the predominant attack vector that is exploited. It is a public resource, fundamentally. It is probably one of the few, there's another one I'll come back to in a little while, but it's one of the few mechanisms and communication mechanisms within a business that not only is it publicly visible, we actively encourage people to send anything they want into it. So as a result, it is the low-hanging fruit for trying to get into a business. And they only have to be lucky once. The people who are trying to get inside your network only have to be lucky once with you clicking on something inadvertently or opening something inadvertently, etc. We have to be lucky all the time to keep them out. So email cannot be understated as something that needs protecting. It's just so important.
No, absolutely. And 100% agree on that point, Dave. They only have to be lucky once. We've seen phishing campaigns just go out left, right, and center. And the reality is they work, right? If you send out, it is ultimately a numbers game. If if I'm an attacker and I send out loads of phishing emails, I send out 100,000, someone's going to click on one of them, right? And that's all I need. Once we start getting into the world of targeted threats, that just becomes a complete different story, but we'll leave it as that, not to scare too many people away for today, and subtly move on to the endpoint side. So I suppose before moving fully into the endpoint side, worthwhile pointing out on the email side, no email security solution is ever going to be 100% effective. When we look at Defender for 365, it is very effective at sandboxing and doing the URL rewriting and scanning, but no system is ever 100% secure. Emails will fall through. And when they fall through, when users click on these emails and download attachments, this is where our endpoint protection, really needs to kick in. And, one of the core fundamentals of security is how we secure our endpoints, because this is where our users are interfacing with all of our business applications and data. Now, when we look at the endpoint side, one of the key things that we've seen, shift within the market is being able to detect and respond, against more sophisticated threats. Now, this is key, and this is something that, Defender for Endpoints can deliver, among other things. It is a next-gen AV platform. It is, an endpoint detection and response platform, but it also has capabilities to discover, vulnerabilities and misconfigurations within our Windows 10 build. So in terms of being more preventative, there are capabilities around this. we can, with Defender for Endpoints, we can quickly jump into those detections and start pushing out remediation activities. And even with some of those remediation activities, we can automatically, block and remediate that. So there is an element of automation to this. I know I mentioned before, sophisticated threats and malware. Defender for Endpoints, it is a next-gen AV and EDR solution. It is capable of detecting, these types of attack vectors and doing something about it. And finally, because Defender for Endpoints is, of course, functioning on the endpoint level, looking at things like URL and putting in an element of web scanning and URL filtering is also one of the capabilities that Defender for Endpoints has.
And I think another thing that cannot be underestimated here is the broad compatibility of Defender for Endpoint. We've got ARM64 support on Windows devices. We've got ARM support on the Mac OS operating system, which means we can cover the new M1 processor Macs properly. We've got all of this different compatibility. But actually, the thing that quite often gets forgotten with Defender is mobile devices. I mentioned just now about email is the only mechanism that we give out as a publicly available, but there's another mechanism we give out, and that's these things. We give out our mobile number to everybody, to all and sundry. It's public information. We are giving out the individually identifiable piece of information for people to target and attack mobile devices. And although it's a constant game of cat and mouse, Defender for Endpoint is now fully GA for iOS and for Android and can be deployed as part of this suite. If you're licensed for Defender for Endpoint, you're licensed for the person's mobile phone as well as their laptop. And that can't be underestimated. It's a really powerful part of the suite.
And I suppose that goes in line with how the market is starting to adopt new terminology, should I say. Endpoints, we typically think of laptops and desktops, when in reality, an endpoint now could be anything. In fact, a mobile device and a tablet, absolutely an endpoint. It's an interface for that user to gain access to corporate applications and data. They need to be secured in the same means.
Yeah, absolutely, mate.
So the next stage of or going down a little bit further on the kill chain, when we go past the endpoint side, we then need to actually look at the identity side. We need a solution that looks at the authentication requests of our users and identifies suspicious activities. Why? Because generally, when an endpoint device is compromised, it's not just about dropping some malware on there and completely thrashing the machine and locking out the processor. It's normally around, well, what do we do next for that next stage of the attack? And that next stage of the attack is generally laterally moving, through the network and to other devices, but also escalating our privileges. So identity at this point is key, and being able to have a solution that looks at the authentication requests of our users and identifies suspicious activities is, of course, crucial. Now, Defender for Identity, it can do exactly that. It can take feeds from both our on-prem local AD servers, but also cloud events from Azure Active Directory to identify these activities and actually start to place measures in place to actually prevent compromise, or at least limit the amount of compromise. So we can actually start looking at risk-based sign-ins and risk-based user policies that can challenge and block users even more so if a suspicious event occurs, i.e., okay, let's MFA that user if they hit a certain risk score, or let's actually block that user and alert our admin or SOC team if their risk score is above that. We can set those thresholds, and this is really important, because once a compromise has happened, credentials typically are leaked. We need to action that very quickly. Additionally, if we are pulling this data and this telemetry from AD and Azure AD, we want to be able to go out and investigate abnormal user behavior and formulate these into incidents that we can see across our environments. So it's a very key thing to understand on the identity side, and it also allows us to put more context into what that attack is actually doing. Yes, they've compromised that device, but if they're going after credentials in a certain way, this is going to start painting a picture of maybe to what the next step of the attack is.
Absolutely. And, you know, if you've got a user that is jumping from a threat level of low to medium, for instance, in Azure AD under this Defender for Identity setup, we can, for instance, deny access to SharePoint, deny access to CRM, so that they can't access customer personally identifiable information, which would be a GDPR issue when they're a medium risk user. So we can de-risk the estate, minimize the blast radius of any potential cross-infection and cross-contamination via ransomware, and help protect the business and the data of the business using these kind of functionality. So it's just so powerful. They can still pick up their email, they can still make phone calls potentially, but they wouldn't have access to the crown jewels, to CRM and to SharePoint where the customer records are stored. So just so powerful. Janara, just as well, keep an eye on the time. I think we've got just over 5 minutes left before we get shouted at. So we need to crack on, don't we? Just
no, that's fine. I can definitely whistle stop through MCAS, which is next. Don't worry, everyone. You'll still be on time to get your coffee and make the next talk track. We'll definitely see to that. And Dave will definitely keep me honest on this. So as mentioned, last one on the list is MCAS, and this is probably one of the most easiest ones to actually go through, because it actually starts pulling on a number of different things. Now, of course, when we look at Microsoft Cloud App Security, its first function is to actually discover shadow IT. We can take in feeds from different firewalls, different appliances, and we can actually see on the networking level who is accessing what. Is someone accessing Dropbox? Is someone accessing Mega Upload or something even worse than that? And how much data throughput is going to that service? So giving us that visibility in terms of what our users are using is, almost step one of Cloud App Security. The second side to that, of course, is right. Well, how do we protect our sensitive information? This is where we can start implementing things like DLP policies, Azure information protection policies, and the likes of that. Now, because we're pulling in that telemetry, we can, of course, protect against any of those anomalies. And when I say telemetry, this is where we can actually start integrating things like Defender for Identity for enhanced user attribute telemetry, but we can also integrate MCAS into things like Defender for Endpoints for advanced control. So if a user is using an application when they shouldn't, and you've also got Defender for Endpoints installed on your clients, you can simply unsanction that application, throw an update down to Defender for Endpoints and say, yeah, that user's not using that app. They wouldn't be able to access it. It would block it on the networking level on that machine. So not only does it give us that discoverability, it also gives us that control, but it also sits quite neatly in the ecosystem of Microsoft.
Go on.
No, go on. I forgot the last point on this, but
that's
no,
all right. I was going to say just quickly, and the other thing people don't realize about MCAS is you can onboard your firewall logs, your proxy logs, your file server logs. Anything that's syslog, really, there's a whole list of product that's available that we can onboard. And unlike some of the other features, like Sentinel is fantastic, but if you want to onboard things that aren't in the Microsoft ecosystem into Sentinel, there is a charge associated with that. MCAS does not cost you any money to send your firewall logs in and enrich this data. So even if you've got a guest wireless network, you can enrich the data in MCAS of what's coming into your guest network by sending the firewall logs across to MCAS, and it can pick up data that's being accessed, shadow IT, all of that kind of stuff. So it's a much more powerful tool than people realize. I think MCAS is quite often overlooked. People jump straight from Defender straight to Sentinel and don't really spend any time on MCAS and what it can do.
And I suppose just to add to that, with Sentinel, you can connect that into MCAS and pull that data out, yeah, right? Absolutely. Again, formulating part of that bigger ecosystem. So hopefully that gives a very good introduction and overview into the M365 stack, how that starts to fit into the actual kill chain, but also giving you a little bit of information in terms of how these components start fitting together to actually fill those gaps and mitigate those risks. Just for the sake of time, probably just going to do a very quick session close down. So in terms of, supporting you with any of the M365, E5 and even E3 following this session, there are a number of sessions and workshops that we can host, one-to-one. Please contact us via the booths or via your account manager to get any further details on this. This is simply just an introduction. There is a lot more. All of us can probably spend what Dave, 2 hours, 3 hours talking
easily.
about this easily. Yep, a full day's workshop is no problem. So there are those workshops to consider. In terms of today, there are a number of other sessions running. There are sessions that are centered around Sentinel, compliance and risk management, and there's even one focused specifically on endpoint security. So that will help to bolster what's in this session. Finally, please do visit the booths. We do have specialists that are manning the booths today, so they can help answer any questions or queries that you may have. And if you even fancy a chat to kick a couple of ideas around and get a bit more information on a particular topic, we can of course facilitate that. But for now, I want everyone to grab their coffee before the next session. So I'm going to wish everyone a great day. Thank you so much for joining and listening, and hope to catch you soon.
Thank you, everybody. See you all soon.